I don't think anyone walks through life of professional sport without having either low moments or doubts. Back in those days, if you were sort of a wilting flower, you just get pushed out. It was the first time I'd ever been dropped. I almost knocked Will out in the warm-up, I think, because I was like, you better make sure you play well. I didn't ever want to lose or give up. When we met, I basically only said hello. I didn't really even talk to her because I was, as I said, I was quite down. Still quite down. I would always say performance should trump victory. We're sort of upside down with the way rugby works. Ireland versus France first up, that could end up being either a Grand Slam decider or a tournament decider at least. And that's the worst case scenario for Lewis Rees-Zammit, is he comes back a better athlete than when he left.
Hello everybody, and a warm welcome then to In The Zone, a series brought to you by Gambling Zone, your trusted online gambling comparison site. Over the next few weeks, of course, in this series, I talk to some of the biggest names in sport, charting their journey, their highs and lows to get to becoming the very biggest names in their field. And I am delighted to be joined today by a World Cup rugby winner, 2003, won the Six Nations, the Grand Slam, considered rugby royalty, considered one of England's rocks for best part of a decade, making 75 appearances. Now, I'll talk about royalty, which is interesting because he's also married into the royal family. There can only be one man. That is Mike Tindall.
Hello.
How are you, Mike?
I'm all right. Is it funny that every time you go through that, I remember just losing 3 Grand Slams?
Oh, no.
Lost 3, yeah. So
does that still pinch you?
I would say 2 of them do. So the first one, which was would have been my 4th cap, would it be? Scotland away in 2000, and then 2011 before the World Cup, we lost in Ireland. We lost a Grand Slam game in Ireland. I didn't play in that one, but I was captain up until I got injured in the Scotland game. But I still remember the losses more than I remember the wins.
This already feels like a therapy session.
I know. But it's just, I think it's always the way. The wins are they're not easy, but they're easy to sort of brush out, whereas the losses probably leave a mark a bit more. So
how are you today? I know you like to rate it out of 10 in your podcast. Where are you right now?
Oh no, pretty good. Pretty good. It was a hectic year last year with obviously the Rugby World Cup. Then the good, the bad, the rugby went on tour for a month, which was, spending that amount of time with James Haskell is always tires you out. And then we always start the year well though. A little trip down to Australia to the Gold Coast, so for the Magic Millions. So that's always a good way to start it. So it's just getting back into. You're sort of 2 weeks behind the swing of January, but
that sounds like
not
a
too
7
bad.
then.
It means that I don't know. I'd say it's an 8. I'm pretty happy.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I feel privileged. Yeah. We've got you on a good day then.
Yeah. Always a good day.
Yeah, good man. Now look, I like to start by talking about the early years. And I'm talking about right at the beginning. I think the formative years of any individual is quite crucial in the shaping of them as a person. You might agree with me or disagree, but you grew up in Otley, West Yorkshire.
Yeah.
What was your childhood like?
Well, no, I was born in Otley. My dad and my mum. My dad was always a bank manager, multiple different banks, but ended up at Barclays. And then my mum was a mum to start off with, but then went back to uni. Sort of once we were pretty much out the door for most of the day, and became a social worker and worked our way up that way. So it was quite straightforward, quite honest. Older brother who literally, was, I would say I was always chasing, as younger brothers always are.
Yeah.
It was good. We went to Queen Elizabeth Grammar School in Wakefield because my dad ended up at Barclays in Wakefield. And that was sort of where, I was there from 7 till I left at 18. So that was probably where I was I learnt I learnt rugby. It was a massive rugby school, and I was a bigger kid, so it was perfect for me in terms of it was the right sport for someone who's slightly physically aggressive and a bit mad. So yeah,
a quiet kid, outgoing.
definitely not a quiet kid. I'd always say, I always describe it as how my mum described me, which was a lovable rogue. So I always pushed the boundaries. I don't think it's ever really changed. Push the boundaries, but sort of know where the hard stop is.
Yeah.
But we'll push the boundaries anywhere else until you get told you can't do it.
Were you always really destined to play rugby, though? Considering your dad was captain at Otley.
Yeah, well, look, we were very much a rugby family. My granddad, he loved his rugby. He was a big old man because my dad's tiny. And actually, my dad's got 4 brothers. They're all tiny. So I think me and my brother's 6'3", maybe 6'4", so we've obviously got a size from my granddad. Oh. And but all my dad's brothers played rugby. They've had 4 kids between them as well, 4 boys, and they all played rugby. So we were sort of, was a rugby.
It was entrenched.
It was sort of like that. And, you know, my brother played rugby before me, so I was growing up watching him play rugby, you know, so it was sort of the way to go. And then being sort of, you know, being that rough and tumble kid as well, it was the perfect sport for you. I mean, I loved pretty much every sport. I just loved being outside, running around, doing whatever, whether that be cricket, whether that be athletics, whatever it might be. I'll be out there doing it. And but rugby was the one that probably fitted. But you know, ironically, it wasn't really professional, so it just happened to be by the just as I started doing my A levels, sort of 96. I finished school in 97. It had just turned professional. So then it's
not as if you come from the police force or a banker.
It suddenly became an option, which was very lucky. And then I ended up getting success in rugby quite late. Like everyone said I was good, and I always played for my county from the first time you can play for your county. You know, but then it's sort of, I never got past, it used to be North of England trials, there was always someone else, or Phil Christopher's, people who went on and did all right for themselves. And it wasn't till my sort of, when I was 18 in my last year, that, you know, I started to get further, and that was mainly actually because of a guy called Jeff Wappett. So I didn't get picked in a lot of the teams, but he was coach at Bradford Grammar School, which was our local big rivalry. And he liked the way I played. So even though I didn't get picked for the North, I ended up going down and playing for the Southwest against the Midlands, and then I got an England trial off the back of that. And then I managed to keep plugging away and just being like that bad smell that wouldn't go away. And I think from expecting to do more and always thinking I was as good as the people who kept picking ahead of me, so you know, you could say built a little chip on the shoulder about proving people wrong. And I think, you know, if I look back on my career, that was generally a lot of my career was, you know, you get people who think there's someone else better than you or whatever, and you always have to prove people wrong. And that quite worked with my mentality. I quite liked it. Yeah, I quite liked that.
Proving the doubters.
Well, yeah, it puts a steely determination in, I think.
Did you ever doubt yourself then?
I would say I don't think anyone walks through life of professional sport without having either low moments or doubts. But I could always channel mine in the right way, mentality-wise. It was affecting the games and understanding where I would fit within a team, understanding my role. You know, I would be the first person to say that I was never the flair player in terms of that, but what I did was understand the game very well, understand how I'd fit into it, understand the players who I had around me and what their strengths were, and then where were the gaps that needed plugging. And if you can make sure you plug those gaps, as your ship's generally not as leaky. So it was, and that's really where I sort of prided myself on. And you know, some of it was about error rate as well. You know, you've got players who can rip up trees and play at 95 and above %, but then their bad game is at 55. And I'd like to say that what I was always trying to do was live at 85. You know, and that way, and it didn't matter what level that was on, it never really dropped, even into biggest games, most pressure games. You know, with with what I thought, the resilience mentally that I managed to gain through, whether that's through, life and, where that's taken you, or as I talked about, people telling you can't do stuff, or that's where I sort of I felt that I planned out in some ways. The bigger the more pressure on, the more I enjoyed it, and that was I think my greatest strength was that.
You see, that is so interesting, because I did ask a few people, if you had to sum up Mike's strength, what would it be? It would be strength, was obviously, but also consistency, and that's exactly what you just said. You would never fall below 70%. You'd never or rarely go higher than 85. But you were there. Yeah. You knew what you'd get. You'd be a 7, 8, 9 out of 10.
Yeah, I think Dean Ryan always described it as well, going back to my character, is quite laid back and everything else, but then having the ability to flick a switch. So I could be messing around, I could have fun with the crowd, and then next minute you're just back to doing what you're doing. And it frustrated a few coaches, because not necessarily did I always understand that could affect other players who think it's okay to do it but then can't do the switch flick. So it's something you have to learn to manage, about how everyone's different about how they prepare for a game, how they get to the place they need to be to go on a rugby field. So but that, it was having that ability to just be quite relaxed and then just go, right, we're on.
When you turned up for England, it was instantaneous, your impact on your debut, Twickenham, Ireland, this try. I mean, it doesn't get much better as a start.
Still a bad dive, though. It's always nice to score on your first.
Yeah, I did see it.
It's like a condor landing.
Did you ever watch that film,
I basically dived and left my feet on the floor. It was very strange, my upper body. It was an ash splash without any air. Look, I think I was involved with England. It was so sort of strange. We finished the England under 18s team that we had was just insanely good, with the likes of Wilco, Dave Flatman, Lee Mears, Andrew Sheridan, Steve Borthwick, Ian Bolshaw. Could just run through a list of names that went on to be capped. I think 12 of the starting 15 probably got capped for either England or another nation, and we had probably
That's a good generation.
4 British and Irish Lions in there. So it was an insane team, and I think we won 47-20 something against Australia when we were toured there in '97. So off the back of that, with everyone now being professional, it opened up that opportunity for go down and play. And I was supposed to be going to Durham Uni to do sports psychology, and Bath. There was a couple of teams that came in, but then Bath. After that tour, it was quite a long tour. It was about 6 weeks. And I was actually pretty knackered, and I didn't really fancy going to uni. So Bath were the first team that sort of offered just to come and have a 1 year fully immersive, and we'll see how you get on, and just defer your uni for a year and see how we go. So that was sort of how we did it. But that Bath team back then was, again, so good, packed full of internationals. I always say that I scored my first game getting back from that England tour. I think I had 10 days before I played on a Wednesday night against Gloucester for the Bath second team, and I scored 2 tries just trailing Ian Evans, who was in the second team. Wow. That just shows how good it was. Adideo Bear was on one wing, Ian Evans was on the other wing. We had like an international front row of Dave Hilton, John Mallett. I can't remember who was at hooker, but it was just Eric Peters was in the second team. Andy Nicol was at 9. It was just when you learn, your learning is so accelerated when you're playing and you're training with. Think of the people in my position. There's obviously Catty's kicking around. Matt Perry was playing 13 at that point. You had Jeremy Guscott. You had Phil de Glample, the England captain. You're like, well, if I'm ever going to learn, I'm in the right place and I'm with the right crew. Obviously, I was slightly different to them. You can look at both me and Phil and realise that we made all Jerry's tackles, but you know what I mean. Yeah. But you were just learning at an accelerated rate. I think on my 19th birthday was when I got my first game for Bath. So then suddenly you're then playing the equivalent of what Premiership was. I can't remember what it was back then. Whether it was Dunbar or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And you're sort of on your way. Now, it was a bit of a stumble, regroup, go as you would expect it to be. I think one of my first away games was Saracens. I think it was a record defeat. So that was when they had Pienaar, Dipro, and Hill as their back row, and they just caused a nightmare. But then again, it was fast learning. You had to adapt. You had to change, evolve very quickly, or you were going to get left by the wayside. But that environment, obviously, the environment was very different to what it is now as well. Whether you'd say it was, you found out pretty quickly if you didn't toe the line, or if you did anything a little bit out of the ordinary, which is not the way now. You've tried too many stuff, forwards and let you know if it didn't come off very, very quickly.
Because it was a very different time back then.
It was very different. But I think it helped shape me in terms of the player and understanding of how the game flows, how the game works, how pressure works, how to best put yourself in the right situations to succeed, and sort of went from there. Then roll around '99, the World Cup, and I went on the training camp, which was at Curran Cove in Australia. I played my first tour game out there with England against Queensland, and then got dropped from the '99 World Cup squad. Got called back in when Jerry got injured just the week before we got Yanni de Beard out of it with his 5 drop goals. So then I just had that constant taster without actually being thrown in completely at the deep end, and I, like always, off the back of a Rugby World Cup, you lose players. DG retired, Jerry obviously retired, so they had to build sort of a new base, and I think it just worked. You talk about perfect timings with the likes of Benny Cohen coming in. Steve Thompson was a bit later, myself, Bolsh, and Bolsh had been playing at a high level for quite a while in terms of, how good he was, and then that sort of blend of having that youth but youth with characters. I think that if you were back in those days, if you were sort of a wilting flower, you just get pushed out. Whereas you had to have some robustness about you to keep the senior players from getting on top of you. That was part of the test. It was part of, can you actually hack that side of it, the pressure side that we'll put on you, and will you come back at us? Jerry always said that it was more of a test to find out. Once you were in with him, you're in, but he would make it hard, and you'd have to earn it, and it was. I think it makes players. It definitely broke players back then as well. So we lost a few people along the way who just couldn't live with that. But I think for that time of rugby, it was a sort of an acid test for you to pass. Yeah,
it'd be interesting now, wouldn't it, to see how many of today's stars in any sport would have got on back 20, 30 years ago.
I think I don't think it was always good, but I do also think there are parts of it where it would be good. If I fast forward to when I was, I did 2 years of coaching at Gloucester. You have players who've never been told they're wrong, and then when you do tell them they're wrong, they can't take it, and
then third parties get involved.
Yeah, and I think I always knew in my career, it didn't matter how well I played. If I got a man of the match or anything else, there was always something that went wrong. There's always something. So whether you see this as a negative or a positive, you can let people wax lyrically about you if you do well, but you've also got to be able to go, well, actually, I made 4 mistakes in that game and I've got to work on those. Know your strengths, but then also and keep working on them, but fix your weaknesses at the same time, or fix why did it go wrong. And I think that's something that players not necessarily have in abundance. They need at the moment. Now, I'm well removed the game for the 8 years since I've retired, well, actually 10 years this year. So things could have changed a little bit, but the game has completely changed. Even from when I retired in 2014, how it has evolved and where it's at now, I think is a great product. It's great to watch. The Heineken Cup over the last 2 weekends has just been outstanding. And then you think of where we are as an international game. We've just got to get the business side of it maybe on the right platform, really, because I think what the players do on the field, they're delivering. I just think the game's probably letting the players down a little bit off the field.
Yeah, and I want to get to that, the state of where we are with English rugby. We have to talk about your career-defining moment, 2003, being part of 15 magical men that made the impossible possible. Funnily enough, we had Jason Robinson on
23 men.
23, yeah, of course.
With extra time,
you're right.
We needed all of them.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it was all hands to the pump, it was.
You could even say the 31 man.
We had Jason Robinson in, and we spoke about his impact and all the rest of it. But so in that tournament, you featured in all 7 but 1.
Yeah, I missed Uruguay.
Semi-finals.
Oh, no, I didn't play Uruguay 2. In the group, so yeah.
So there's the second one, but that was the big one, wasn't it? The semi-finals, France.
Yeah.
Mike Catt was given the nod.
Yeah, played it. He came on in the quarterfinals and swayed I'd say swayed the game for us. Just giving, Wales were on fire, and he just gave Johnny an extra out in terms of territory and everything else.
How did that conversation go down with you?
What getting dropped?
Yeah.
Not. I think it was the first time I'd ever been dropped. So it's not the best time to have that. And, it was the first. So it was the first time I've had to sit down with Clive in that sort of environment. But, I would say I wasn't happy about it. I was pretty angry about it. I thought I was probably playing better than Will at the time. Even though Will scored in that quarter final, but Jason could have passed it inside and I'd have walked under the post. But I don't dwell on. I don't dwell on things like that. So I sort of went out. It ended up being a good decision because I went out and had a few beers with Martin and Austin Healy.
Slight sliding doors moment.
Yeah, and met my wife. So it was not a bad thing.
So does Sir Clive get credit for that?
Well, that's why he's a sir. Not really. That's a joke. So it ended up being one of those things that worked out in my life as a good thing. Obviously, it still didn't. I would have preferred to play in that game. And it's sort of a mixture of emotions that you go through because obviously you're gutted because you want to play, you want to compete. And then it took me probably 24 hours to then realise it didn't really matter because there's nothing I can do about it now. The decision's been made. So all I can do is make sure that Will and Catty are ready to play this game and help them in whatever way I can or whatever they need, because I would prefer to have them be in the conversation of being playing in the World Cup final than going home. So I think that game, out of any game I've ever played, was the most pumped up I've ever been for.
Yeah.
Because
that proved the doubters wrong mentality.
Well, it's that, but it's also I've got no effect on the game right now. I'm on the bench, so I do have an effect if I get a chance. But I've got all this energy that I don't know how to get out. I almost knocked Will out in the warm-up, I think, because I was like, you better make sure you play well. Because I was sort of, you get to hold them to account because, I've been dropped. Will
you want some justification?
Yeah, Will's come back. If you think about my career, I played with Catty in 01 for the whole of 01, really, because Will was, I think, injured. Then Will's come in, and then it's been sort of bounced around a bit with Catty, but I've been sort of more of the consistent. I missed 01 with an injury as well. So Catty had played with Will then, and it was just like the three of us, we'd been so close. It was more like demanding that they play well, so we get through this because one of us has had to sit out. Now you better make sure you get it right in this game, and I was so pumped up for it because it's the first time where you don't just know that you're going to go out and release all of this energy. But yeah, it ended up that we played outstandingly well, really, in the wet against France, and Catty played well and everything sort of came to fruition, and Catty was knackered at the end of it. So I think he said to Clive that even if he wanted him to play, I think he'd have struggled to play a whole game in the final. So, but that's what needs to be done. If you need to have that ability to lean on other players, and you just don't know whether if I'd have played against France, would we won. You can't look at it in that way. Everything happens for a reason, and it worked out in the best way that it could have done for us.
It's been over 20 years now since you won the World Cup.
Yeah.
I can't believe it's been 10 years since you retired almost.
I know.
Does it, when you look back, does it feel like an out-of-body experience? Did that really happen to me?
Yeah, look, I don't really sit there and dwell on it. There's times where there'll be an old game on or something, and you might flick it on and you might watch it, and probably then just critique how I played. I was like, oh God, why have I done that? But I don't really ever sit every day and go, sat there and won a World Cup. I think players of that era are very good at just looking forward and sort of, you've got to move on. Unfortunately, the way of rugby is, it's a sport that demands a lot of you, your sort of heart and soul, but then you don't really get remunerated for it. So once you retire, you've got to go and find something else to do, find a new job, and somehow put it together. Now, rugby can help you on that pathway, depending on how far you get and everything else, which it's very good for, because a lot of the people that watch it are at high-end business levels, and they love the game that much, they want to help players out. But it can leave you a bit battered and bruised at the same time.
What fired you to be the best?
I think again, it goes back to that mentality. I didn't ever want to lose or give up. It's funny now, I have that battle with me occasionally about, depending on what I do, I'm very much more comfortable now of being happy to lose, depending on what it is. Depending on what it is. Depending on if it's something that I know I'm not that good at, I'm okay with it. I don't expect. Whereas if it's something that I do expect to win, then it's slightly different. But I think I still don't let my kids win, so they'll go the same thing that I did with my dad.
It's a bit harsh on Lucas. He's only one.
Yeah, still you got to make them know early, and it builds that competitive spirit. Mia's unbelievably competitive, and it's then about channeling it in the right way that they want to do some good with it. So I think quite a lot of people I know have who've had rugby parents or rugby dads. They don't let you win very often because they always want to make it that you've earned it, because that is what rugby majority of the time is. Yeah.
Look, I don't want to compare rugby to football, but there was a documentary with Wayne Rooney, and he's playing his little kids at, I don't know, not chess, but something like not Monopoly, but something like that. Anyway, he just trounces them each time.
Yeah.
And they're crying in the background, like to mummy, daddy won't let me win, and he's like, I'm not going to let them get away with it.
There's a fine balance between it, and at chess, I would.
No, it was less cerebral than that.
Well, I don't let Mia win at chess either, I'm not even very good.
And
at
remind
chess,
everyone, how old was Mia?
She just turned 10.
Yeah.
So
it's only a matter of time till she beats you.
Yeah, exactly. So racing up the stairs, but when she's earned that win,
right,
then it's great.
Yeah.
But you've got to push her to earn that. You've got to give her the chance that it looks like she's going to win. Then you just rip the carpet.
Now look, I did gloss slightly over the fact that you went out for a drink when you obviously didn't make that team for the semi-finals. But you're out with Martin Corrie, you're out with Austin Healey. Was it to kind of down your sorrows a little bit?
I think so. Obviously, Richard Hill came straight back in from nowhere because of his injury.
I don't know about Austin's flight, by the way.
That is quite entertaining. So Austin had to stay off site because as he landed, he found out that he wasn't going to be in the squad and he was getting sent back home.
And he got flown out of space.
Which no one ever is upset about. It's a great story to see Austin in pain. And then, so Cozzo was going to go meet him for a beer because he had to stay in a different hotel. Because when you're not part of the 31, you're not allowed to stay in the same hotel. It's a weird World Rugby rule. So we went to... Cozzo was obviously disappointed because he dropped out of the squad completely. And so I was like, well, I'll come with you. I was pretty miserable because I was still gutted that I wasn't going to be playing on the weekend. Yeah, we went for a drink in the Manly Wharf bar, and to be fair, Austin and Cosra both met Zara before, because they used to stop off on the way home from playing Bath if they'd won and have a beer. In
it was a Leicester Tigers thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, and a beer that was a racing pub. I can't remember whether it was the one just off Junction 14 or the Pheasant or something else. I think it might have been another place, but I can't remember. And they'd met her there a couple of times previously, so they sort of knew. And Zara was out on a very long lunch with some girlfriends that she had because she did a gap year over in Australia, and then and worked over there for a year, and then went back for the World Cup with her brother.
So you knew from the off, before you met her, that she was part of the royal family?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, she was in the paper a lot back then.
So did you...
Piercings and things.
So when you're having a drink, are you quite kind of aware of all that and thinking where this could go?
In all fairness, like when we met, I basically only said hello. I didn't really even talk to her because I was, as I said, I was still quite down. Yeah. So I wasn't really that bothered about walking into a situation with 8 girls and having a laugh at that point. So it was more, it was a thing that just went on after Austin when he flew back. He'd sent me Zara's number because she wanted to know what the team's plans were, where they were going to go after.
So not yours specifically?
No, where we were going to go after after the final. And then Harry was there anyway, so we saw Harry after, so she would have found out anyway. But and then when we got back, she was still out there for a bit, and just got talking to her. And then I had mutual friends at Bath who'd played rugby with her brother at Exeter University, and it sort of worked together that we sort of crossed a few friendships, and then it went from there. Really, it was more of a friendship thing that then developed into something else.
So, because you're a royal through marriage, you're the first of your kind to go onto a reality TV series, which, by the way, I have to say, was brilliant value. I can't believe you didn't make the final. I thought it was. Where was it? I was trying to get #justice for Mike, but it wasn't working. Do you think Zara might ever feel tempted to do something like that?
I don't know. I doubt it. I mean, so when I retired from rugby, I hadn't invested enough time in a plan for post rugby. And then I got offered to go to Costa Rica with Bear Grylls, and it was at the time of the Autumn Internationals, or just before, and there was the Bermuda Classics out there, rugby, and it was a sort of a break away from having to sit at home and watch England play at Twickenham, and B, just to have a bit of a crack with rugby lads that I hadn't had since I retired in July or whatever, but then also a way of early money and doing something completely different with Bear Grylls. So it was something that I thought would be good to do. It was only 2 weeks, but it just broke up that Autumn International, which I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about. So I thought it'd be quite good for me. And then then I did the jump, and then which was entertaining. I just love skiing. I always said when I watched that on TV, when Steve Redgrave was doing it, I was like, well, if I ever get asked to do this, I'll definitely do it because I love skiing, and I want to learn to snowboard, and that's a way of learning to snowboard without actually annoying your friends and them having to wait whilst you sit down on a slope. And then and I think I'm a Celeb was just a continuation of the fact that I was happy to sort of go out and do something like that, and that was the. And now looking back on it, I actually enjoyed it. I think with sort of rugby players, you can prepare for how it's. In anything with the Bear Grylls one and with I'm a Celeb, I prepared in my mind that it would be horrendous, and then everything's always a little bit easier.
Righty told me it was the hardest thing he's ever done.
He's a footballer. Look, I think what it is. The boredom and the hunger.
The hunger got him.
Without any shadow of doubt, the hardest things to overcome. The good thing for me was I had Owen Warner who was even more hungry than I was and actively showing it. Well, I was like, well, okay, I'm not quite that hungry.
Yeah.
He took an hour and a half to eat his meal because he wanted to savour everything. I was like, I'm not sure that actually helps you, because he was quite lean as well. He was a little race snake in great nick. I was like, you've probably burnt off all the calories you've eaten. Why don't you just waffle it in and feel full for once? That's the hard bit of that. Now I look back and go, I wish I'd done a few more challenges, but unfortunately Matt took all the brunt of the public votes on that.
I wonder why.
I wonder why. But actually, the way that the show works, that's the worst thing you can do, because you get all, he gets all the TV time. And to be fair to Matt, uber competitive. Saw it as the way to appease what people thought about him, and would always mocking at everything else. So he actually came across well because he won loads of stars. So you've got to give him credit for that.
Yeah. Was Zara happy you did it?
In the end, I think she was fine with it. It wasn't really something I really wanted to do. They'd asked us for quite a few years to do it, and it wasn't really a need there to do it. But off the back of COVID and everything else, in terms of a lot of my stuff was in sort of hospitality, and obviously that'd been shut for 2 years. So you had sort of that.
It's been fascinating, but we haven't finished there. That's Mike's personal story. In a moment, we'll be talking about Six Nations and the state of English rugby. But a quick reminder: you're watching In the Zone, in association with Gambling Zone, the trusted online gambling comparison site. Welcome back to In the Zone. I'm with former England centre and, of course, World Cup winner 2003, Mike Tindall. And we've got the Six Nations coming up, 2nd of Feb, Mike.
Yep.
It's the start of a new cycle, of course, after the World Cup. How much are you looking forward to it from the 2nd of Feb?
I think the Six Nations has just been absolutely amazing for the last 3 years. I think the standard of rugby, having France, Ireland, Scotland playing at an unbelievable level. England sort of really in a bit of limbo with Eddie since 2019, with Eddie Jones, and then obviously Steve having to take over. Still trying to find their way. Steve was sort of thrown in last Six Nations. He had a week I think with them before, but then even the warm-up games of the World Cup, things didn't really go to plan, but then the World Cup did go to plan, and arguably
it went a lot better than many expected.
Well, 12 minutes away from a Rugby World Cup final, when people were saying they wouldn't even get out of the group. So now there's definitely still work-ons there for England. I think with how the English teams so far are going in the sort of Champions Cup, and the likes of how Bath are sort of reformed, and how Exeter are going well in the competition. Northampton are going well, and there's been a few additions from the World Cup. Not a few people have dropped out as they always do after a Rugby World Cup, but a few people still in there. It's going to be interesting to see how England go. I hope they would say by their standards really disappointing for the last 2 Six Nations, but when you've got Ireland versus France first up, that could end up being either a Grand Slam decider or a tournament decider at least. So but the standard of the rugby over the last 3 years in the Six Nations has been outstanding, which has been shown by the level of support. 9 to 12 million people watching every week, and now obviously we've got that a Netflix documentary that comes out on the 24th of January, which will hopefully peel back and open up something about the players. Rugby is such a team-based sport where the team always comes first. The likes of having Finn Russell, who sort of stands above the parapet, Antoine Dupont, who's an absolute superstar. Obviously Entomac's injured at the moment. You've got Jalibert who steps in. You've got Hugo Keenan in Ireland. You've got all these players who are now becoming at a level where they could probably kick that on a little bit. Duan van der Merwe, someone like there are plenty out there that hopefully this sort of Netflix interest will be the catalyst for that we want it to be for the sport.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned some individuals there, some star names who won't be involved in the Six Nations. Dupont obviously is now looking to build.
Yeah, very strange. I'm sure he could play both.
Yeah,
but,
building up to the Olympics on home soil.
Yeah, but I understand that.
Owen Farrell for England has stepped aside to get some time for himself and the family. Do you think it's the right move for him?
Well, of course, it's his decision, so of course it's the right move. I fully understand it. We've said this on The Good, the Bad, the Rugby numerous times, is I don't understand where it comes from that people go after Owen when all he's given is his heart and soul to the country through his leadership. He's almost vilified for being over-competitive, but then you get him off the field. He's a gracious, lovely man who's a fantastic husband, fantastic father, and he just doesn't need that. And I think it's a bit of a line in the sand for him, going, well, I don't actually need it. It was like a triple threat of things. Obviously, he's uber competitive. There's sort of always edge about his, how he balances himself on the edge of that penalty line in terms of whether it be with tackling or whether it just be with aggressiveness. But he is from up north, so he's always angry. So, and then also, his just relentlessness to win. That's all he wants to do. Every time he steps on the field, he wants to do anything he can to make sure the team wins. And sometimes people look at that in the wrong way. And then he doesn't really engage with the media to sort of push out the other side of it because he doesn't feel that he needs to do it. So, if he's going to end up in Paris, which is the chat that he's going to go to Racing, and I think no one's earned it to go and actually enjoy the fruits of his labour more than what Owen's done. And it will be a shame if people don't respect that, because people talk about Wilco all the time because he's won a Rugby World Cup.
I was going to say exactly the same thing. Positionally very similar, but viewed upon very differently.
Yeah, viewed upon very differently. But actually, arguably, Owen's better, really. Johnny had a lot of injuries, so you could say he missed out on a lot of time. But Owen's still 31 or whatever he is, so he could easily go for another World Cup if you want to. If you put Johnny Sexton as the guideline, I mean, in all fairness, Johnny Sexton hasn't played anywhere near as many games as Owen has through his career. But he's England leading point scorer, 112 or 17 caps for his country. Captain his country for God knows how many years, and is the heartbeat of that team. So England are going to miss him without a doubt, but he also sat within that debate about where England should go as a 10. So it removes a third of a headache for Steve, but then Finn Smith sort of stepped up to put another headache in, playing for Northampton at a very good level. So, but you've got Marcus and George Ford, and then one of those will get the starting berth. And the thing with England at the moment is I feel it doesn't matter who they pick; they've got to figure out how they want to play first. Yeah, and through that World Cup, they got better through the whole World Cup period they got better defensively. Their energy level, their enthusiasm was off the charts, but I would still say their attack game wasn't where it wants to be. Most of the nations around the world at the moment are keeping the ball off the floor, whereas that's something that we're not doing at the moment, or it feels that we're not. There's a big thing around stats and about kicking, and at the moment, the teams that win are kicking more, but they're kicking in a completely different way to what England are kicking at the moment. So there's definitely work-ons there, but we have the players. As I say, you look at how the Premiership teams are going and the style of rugby that they play, how they've done in the Champions Cup, how they've done in the Challenge Cup, that we're definitely at that level. But if you go and watch sort of top 14 rugby, how much they keep the ball off the floor is quite impressive.
So the players are there to play more expansive, entertaining rugby. Steve Borthwick can get it out of them, though. Yeah,
I think Steve can. I think but it's going to take time, because with Steve, he is fundamentals first. I think that having known him since he was 16, he's all about getting the nuts and bolts done first. But hopefully now, having that time, having the World Cup, having the time with the players, he can then kickstart that and allow those players to then go out and express themselves a bit more.
Yeah, and do you think actually the makeup of the squad might force his hand in that respect anyway? There is this overview that the forwards maybe not as physical as other teams, and that's
I'd say they're not as massive.
No,
I mean, but if if you compare impacts, you're looking at France, Ireland, and then South Africa are obviously juggernauts. So there are, but that's the beauty of rugby. There are many ways to skin a cat. Throughout this Rugby World Cup, last year's Rugby World Cup, everyone was arguing about the fact that South Africa were playing a 7-1 split. Well, they're perfectly in their right to do that. The whole point of rugby is then you've got to figure out how you beat it. And realistically, through the quarterfinal, semi-final, and final, every team had a chance to beat South Africa. They just didn't, and they can look at that themselves and kick themselves. England, arguably, you'd say, dominated South Africa for 60 minutes. But then the big green juggernaut got back on and managed to pull through. So that's the beauty of rugby. There are so many tactical differences in the way of you try and get things done. You look at Harlequins and the way they play, and they were running in tries on the weekend from their own 22, from quick taps, this and that, and that's what England have got to figure out. England have got rugby for me is about pace at the moment. It's about speed of ball. Not giving defences time to set, because otherwise,
quick hands.
It's so easy to get the defence to get on top, and if you can do that, and you can then bring in that offload game, then we've got so many players with unbelievable skill sets. So we just hope that we keep seeing them.
But you see, it has been a turgid few years, and you look back at the last 3 Six Nations, England have only managed 2 wins out of 5. So should
when you say turgid for England point of view?
Yes. So do you think that Steve should use this almost as an experimental tournament where they should put style over results?
It's very hard to do that because you're in an international job, and if he wants his job for a long period of time, you have to win games.
But is this the pain you've got to get through to get?
Yeah, well, no, I'm not saying that I disagree with you what you say. I would always say performance should trump the victory. So you should be focused on what your performance is, because if you perform to your best of your ability and then you still fall short, then at least you can look back and go, well, at least we gave everything. The worst losses are the ones where you try and minimise mistakes and everything else, and then you still lose because you haven't really. Especially
you come away with nothing.
Especially if you look with the players that are going to be in this team, whoever he picks. You look at how the level that Ollie Lawrence is playing at the moment. You look at what Marcus Smith does week in, week out. I know that Sale got smashed on the weekend, but you look at Fordies can always play at international level up front. The forwards that we've got, Cam Marrow, how well Marrow's playing for Saracens. Now we need to make sure that he's has the ability to play at that level for England. And that's the thing is, if you look at all the players individually and what they're doing at their club, they're probably playing exceptionally well. Now so then you've got to find a way that you put them all together and they can play to one goal that they all agree with that suits their game. An argument I would say, if you pull up a relevant one, currently Henry Slade is on unbelievable form for Exeter. But then if you go and look at his form when he's got an England jersey on, it's just not the same. And we've seen it in numerous sports where someone who can play unbelievably well for their club. Yeah. Now, then the question is that the player not being able to adapt to the way that England are trying to play, or is it England not adapting to what their players need to be doing to play the best way that suits them? And I think that's the bigger question for England at the moment, is finding a way where the guys enjoy what they're doing and how they're playing, and you get the best out of them on the field, because without that, it doesn't matter who you pick. If you try and play a really strict, compact game, you might as well just try and find the biggest ones you can pick and the best defenders, and you go from there.
Jamie George is Steve's pick as captain. Yeah. One of the most consistent hookers around the globe at the minute.
And just a great human being as well. Great team man. funny, engaging, gets the media side of it, which would be quite nice. I think England have hidden their players away for a long time from the media. So I think we've got to sort of get the players back out there and let the players sort of take control of it. 'Cause no offense to Steve, he's not the most charismatic of man. He's a man from Preston who wants to get.
He's a doer, really.
Yeah, he wants to get things done.
Yeah. By the way, I said doer, not dower, but you maybe use it.
Yeah. I do use doer every now and again, but no, he likes to get things done.
Yeah.
So and hopefully, we can start seeing those guys on the back of it, because, there's loads going on in the game about people going to, Henry Arundel going to staying at Paris and not coming back.
There's a few,
but at the same time, if he's playing in an unbelievable stadium at Racing with Sia Closey, if Faz goes there, Christian Wade's obviously come back. There's so many French internationals in that team, so he's actually benefited from playing with unbelievable players. So he might play for England, he might not. We've got an abundance of back three, so he doesn't really know. So why? I understand his decision. Actually, he's working with Stuart Lancaster, who in 2015, before that, in 2011, turned a group of young kids into the team that went on an unbeaten run, won a Grand Slam, and he was renowned as how well he could coach young players. So it's actually maybe not a bad decision for him. And I think there's a big thing with England at the moment about trying to protect the Premiership. But I'm sort of the other side. For years, the Premiership has paid other nations to house their great players. Faf de Klerk, De Luga, lots of South Africans have come and played in this league and then go back and win World Cups, and they're bringing up the next generation of players. So I think I've got no issues with English players going and letting other people pay their salaries and then coming back and play for the country. I think.
So you get rid of that, because South Africa got rid of theirs, didn't they?
I would get rid of it at the moment just because of where we are.
It's damaging us
salary cap wise. 3 years ago, before COVID or whatever, we were at 7.9 million with a cap. We had two marquee players. Now, I'm not saying that was the right thing for the game, because obviously the game is in its financial issues that it's in, but it made it, you could get paid well to play in this country. Now it's at 4.9, so you've taken 3 million off a budget for 35 players.
They're trying to eke it up a bit, aren't they?
I'm not going to be fast enough to do the math on that, but they are trying to eke it up. But is it the right thing to eke it up at the moment in the financial?
It's still unsustainable.
You look at Newcastle. Alex Codling has gone. Seymour Curdy lives underneath the wage bracket because he knows that that's what he can afford to keep the club running. So from a business point of view, he's saying this is where we need to be. Now, can we compete? No, they don't have a marquee player. They don't do any of that. Now, is that the right decision? Well, it's the right decision for the owner of the rugby club, and if he doesn't want to do it, what does the club do then? So it's and that's the thing, is where I think we've got wrong, is we've got to find a way of making it even Newcastle become an attractive place to go play. We can guarantee that we're going to get 10,000 through their turnstiles, and at the moment we can't do that with the way that the league's set up, but yet we drag our feet about how we should change things to make it better. There are things coming in, I think, from what I'm hearing, about trying to move things forward. Obviously there's a global season that's, I think, goes into place in 2026. So everyone's slowly, but the rugby cog turns very slowly, and I think it missed out on an opportunity in COVID to sort of really do it fast and dramatically, and it would have created a lot of interest straight off the bat.
But we're still playing catch up.
We are playing catch up. We're playing catch up with a group. Rugby is a game built on tradition and built on, and we love that tradition. But there's traditions that should stay and there's traditions that should go. How long ago did Will Carling have his moment with the committee, and has that really changed? I don't think it has. I don't think we have don't think we have anyone who's driving severe change. But if someone does come in, they normally don't get anywhere because people don't want to do the change. And if we want rugby to survive in its guise, we're sort of upside down with the way rugby works. If you look at football, if you look at NRL, if you look at rugby league, the club game drives everything, whereas international drives our sport. So it's the wrong way around. We've got loads of people who watch us internationally. You've got the third biggest global sporting event in the Rugby World Cup, which is massive.
But what about all those 30,000 empty seats at Twickenham for Fiji? What's that down to?
Well, I think that was... You still got to win games. And England at that point... Yeah, and people could be saving up for...
Other things.
The World Cup up and coming. But I think England's form going into that was part of it. But if you look at we're the envy of every other major rugby nation around the world, that England versus Italy is 85,000 every week. It's always a full house. Every Six Nation game is always a full house. Every autumn international is always a full house. So we have it that way round, and unfortunately we need to build it the other way up, and it's not at the moment, and we've got to find a way of bringing that back together. Whereas if you look at Ireland now, every other nation apart from us and France are centrally contracted. Now, would that work for us? It wouldn't, because of the 10 owners that we've got rugby clubs at the moment. But if you could, they bring through their next players. They get to rest their internationals at the time that they need to, and then they unleash them on the games that matter, Champions Cup games, coming into the end of the URC, or they stagger their games through the URC to allow them to get game time but also stay fresh. Whereas we're a constant grind for 20, 18 weeks of the year. I think there's a better way of doing it. We've got to figure out how to do it.
Interestingly, Steve Borthwick said recently he thinks that English rugby has turned a corner. Can you see that?
I don't. But I don't know what he means. How does he mean? What case he means that?
I think probably off the back of the World Cup. Maybe just the... Well, he's probably talking about the atmosphere around England.
But I think he's turning a corner on how people think about England. But also he might be talking about the fact that they're putting out possibly England contracts to try and keep people in this country. But again, it becomes attractive to your Marrows or people who are guaranteed to be playing. But then again, for the people who sit on the edge, rugby in this country now as a club level, if you want a job to play club rugby, if you play a key role position, so tight head prop, hooker, you need 1 second row, 8, 9, 10, fullback. So if you play one, your demand is high because that's where you got to spend your money. Whereas then if you're a back three, and Anthony Watson has said this, one of the best wingers in the world, but there are many fast young kids out there who can do a job. They won't do Anthony's job, but they want to spend their money on these 8 positions because they don't have that much, so they need to make sure they get the best that they can get in those positions, and then they'll fill the rest. And that's where we're at, unfortunately. And that makes it really difficult for someone like Anthony, or any sort of back three player who wants to play for their country but also earn a decent living. It makes it really, really difficult for them, and there are too many to have in those England contracts that they hand out.
Do you see a way back for Owen Farrell?
Of course, of course.
What I mean is, he's not called time on his England career. You said he's 31, but he's still got plenty to offer England. Yeah, I think he would. I wouldn't say that any decision's been made up in Owen's mind. I think he's clearly a brilliant player to play at the level and the intensity that he's played for so many years. I think it'd be quite nice for him to go and maybe get out of the spotlight in France, and then 2 years' time he can come back and have another run at the next World Cup if he wants to. Obviously, being in Racing, he's still available for the Lions in
in next year, so he can quite happily go about his business over there under the radar. That's what Wilco loved when he went over there, was the fact that he just went about his business, and the media is so different in France, so positive compared to on individuals compared to over here. I think I don't think anyone will argue with me, but correct me if I'm wrong. But he can him and his family can fly under the radar, and he'll cut. If he plays well enough, a club like Racing, he'll play for the Lions. They'll have no issues of taking him. So yeah, I think hopefully it'll be good for him, and then he might get rejuvenated and want to come back and try and compete for that England spot.
Talking of other individuals in the spotlight, Louis Rezamet, and that move. Obviously, he's seen as the biggest up and coming Welsh star, trying out for the NFL. Nothing guaranteed, by the way. He's just a tryout. So, as far as he's concerned, ends his Lions' hopes for the immediate future.
Well, not necessarily, because if he doesn't get picked up after his 10-week training camp, he'll be back. So, from my understanding of how it works, he'll go do a 10-week hard, intensive training course and be watched by the scouts for all the franchises. Then at the end of that 10 weeks, I think they decide if they want to try and get you on a practice roster. Now, I don't know then how long that time period was. If you get in, are you guaranteed 3 years? Are you guaranteed 2 years? I don't know what that is. But, ultimately, if he doesn't do everything that needs to be done, which I think he will physically for the first 10 weeks of training camp, and then it gets into the sort of more of the X's and O's, and we see how he gets in there. But the NFL is quite brutal, so if he's not,
it's also complicated. By the way,
if he's not showing it,
no, just the playbook. That he's got to know, and apparently, I think either his father's quite big into it, or he's been big into it from a very early age. So it's not as if he's going in raw and doesn't know what he's doing. But he's one of those freaks of nature that could go in and make
it does. It also depends where he ends up playing, and where. I think for a wide receiver, I don't know enough about a playbook to know it, but you've probably got more chances of it being quite easy to learn than what's going on in your offensive line or your defensive line or your running back or fullbacks or whatever, or tight ends. But first and foremost, he's got past the physicality test, and then then it'll come down to learning everything. Christian Wade is now made a successful journey back, scored a great try on the weekend. I think Christian would probably say come back a better athlete in terms of footwork and everything else, and that's the worst case scenario for Louis Rezamet, is he comes back a better athlete than when he left. His footwork will improve because they spend so much time on that. Raw pace, training at that elite level that they'll put him through. Now, I'm not saying that rugby's not elite anyway, but if you want to go and walk into that NFL, you've got to be hungry for it. And he's going to have to train like he's never trained before, because there are a huge lineup of players, like college. The 1,000 that get drafted every year, there's 1,000 that doesn't, and they would give their left arm to be in the position that he's in. So that's going to be the big thing, is desire, and I think that's his biggest challenge is he going to go to the absolute well, like the person who's from a broken background and fought his way through college ball, high school ball, college ball, to get a draft pick or get into that position? Is he going to fight that hard from a roster point of view? But I think I wish him all the best. I think it's the perfect age for him to do it, because he can always come back in 2 years' time. There's another World Cup round the corner. If it doesn't go that well, he'll still be back, and he'll be back next year, and he can push for a Lions spot. So I think from his point of view, it's a risk that you can say it is worth taking. You'll find out a lot more about where rugby's at over another year and a half as well. I think for his point of view, I don't think it's a bad decision. I think obviously Warren won't be very happy of finding out that on the eve of when he was supposed to announce his squad, but I think it all came up really quite late, and he's taken the opportunity, and I credit him for having the balls to do it.
Talking of which, let's just round this all off. Talking about risks, anything you wish you should have done, looking back?
I always hate this question because I think you can always look back at something, but you don't then know what that would have on. I look at it very philosophically.
Yeah.
You know, you don't know where that would then steer you. Would I have loved to play for the Lions? Of course I would. I think I was the type of player that would suit the Lions. I think the Lions would suit me. But would I change something? Or what would I have to give up to
What would you
have made
forsake
that?
for that?
What would I make? I wouldn't change. I've been very, very lucky in my career to lead me to where I am right now, and I don't know that if I'd played for the Lions, would that have changed? Would that have changed in some way? There's there's always a couple of things you could say I would have liked to have done differently. You know, you got dropped by Jono in the 2011 World Cup after the Scotland game, and I would have loved to have said, no, don't drop me. I need to play. I didn't play well against Scotland. I know I didn't. There were reasons for that. There were health. I was struggling that week with a tooth infection, but anyway, you can't blame that. You still got to choose to go out and play on that field, and if you let yourself down, you let yourself down. But I wish I said, no, mate, you need to make sure you pick me, because I would have loved to play in that France quarter-final that we lost. But outside of that, you've got to, fate is fate, and I always sort of believe in that. You get where it goes. I wouldn't change anything because I'm happy where I am now. So everything worked out.
You've been brilliant company. Thanks for coming in today.
No worries.
Mike Tindall. We've been In the Zone in association with Gambling Zone. I'm Manish Bhasin. We'll see you next time.